I've been spending a lot of time thinking and listening and listening. Um, it's been very good. But I'm also asking other people for feedback. Um, I definitely need feedback to try to stay on the right path here with all of this. So yeah, this is a video based on some feedback. Thanks, Ronnie, for your feedback. I'll do my best. Yeah, I did a couple of videos on Esau and Jacob, kind of what that story meant to me, in the context of the story, and then some of the things I think it's important for us to remember when we're accepting this idea that the world of the early church was a little bit bigger than what we have in our Bible and in the history of the church. That just allowing ourselves to see more of that world now. I think that's really important as we're trying to understand the message, and then thinking about bridging some gaps across maybe people groups, different people of faith. I think that's an important part of why I'm doing this. It's not to scold people like you are getting it wrong. Listen to me, I've got it right. It is about maybe we all have part of the story, and listening to other parts of the story is going to bring us closer, rather than just telling people what we believe and our version of the story and trying to convince them that they're wrong. That it's way more constructive and way more in line with this Jesus teaching that I believe in, and I know a lot of other people believe in. If we are using that teaching to bridge gaps, not burn bridges, and separate from other people in the world. So the Jacob and Esau series was a lot about that, and then this latest video I did on Cain and Abel, I think, was more about bridging this gap between people and God. There's a very important process, I think, that's been happening for thousands of years, which is a return process to God, getting back to where we were maybe originally, in this grand cycle of separation and falling, but also return. I don't believe the message of Christianity or Islam or Judaism is a message just of falling and free falling. I think there is this universal message of return as well. So if we can recognize that we're in this return phase, and that's the work that God is doing in humanity right now. I think that's a hopeful message, and that's a hopeful place to come from when you're talking about religion and what it means to you, and spirituality and what it means to you. So yeah, I've accepted that that's the phase we're in. So anything I can say that is about this return phase, I think it's important to focus there. So yeah, this concept of being separated and how do we get back. I think the church, especially the Christian church, has been fixated on one particular aspect of that return journey, more than others, and it is this idea of sin and our fallen nature, this 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 fallen nature, this sinful nature, and our battle against our nature, and our failures against our nature, or our nature causing our failures, which are falling short of these expectations of God. This struggle of human nature and godly nature, and how do we close that gap? That entire struggle has been defined by this concept of sin. And I suppose I haven't spent a lot of time on sin because of my faith. I do believe there is a part of the Jesus story, which is the conquering of sin, part of the story. I think most Christians hear about this in a different context than what I believe. So, in my context, when I read, especially the Gospels, when I read those Gospels that are, the four canonical Gospels, I think there's a very clear message about sin in there. And then when you read the non-canonical Gospels, some of the other early Gospels of these other divisions of Christianity, any blanks that you might find, any gaps in the teachings of Jesus that are in the Gospels, some of those gaps are filled in some of these other texts that don't conflict with the existing Gospels. They build on the existing Gospels. There are additional teachings that help you understand just what this conquering of sin was all about. And it really has to do not with humans being better humans, or humans changing their behavior and becoming more righteous, or humans somehow conquering their fundamental flawed nature, this fallen nature that comes in the earliest parts of the story of the Abrahamic religions and other religions. The message of Jesus that's delivered is not about how humans do better. It's this new covenant, which is a new agreement between God and man. Man in the sense of all of mankind, not a particular people group, and not even an agreement between God and people of a certain faith, or people who follow a certain creed. It is an agreement between God, the God of all of the earth, not the God of a people, but the God of everything, having an agreement with the people, all of the people, not just a people group. That is a completely different covenant than the Old Covenant. The Old Covenant was a God of everything, making an agreement with one people group, the people of Abraham, and eventually that blessing of Abraham passing within a particular lineage of the people of Abraham. It's perfectly fine to understand that there's this old covenant that existed between God and the people of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But the Jesus message was not a new covenant between God and the people of Jacob. It was a new covenant between the God of all, who Jesus claims is his Father. That when he talks about God, and when he talks about being from God, it's this God of Abraham that is presenting this covenant not to the people of Abraham, but to the people of the world, all people. And this covenant is not about sin. This covenant is about something else. This covenant is about coming back into the family of God, being accepted back in. This is this is laid out in some parables. There's the parable of the prodigal son, and the joy that comes from the father when one of the lost, one of the outsiders comes back in, and the pure joy that's experienced by the father when that happens, and the complete lack of judgment that happens whenever that decision is made to come back into the house of God. And there's a welcoming, not a judgment, that comes with that. It's laid out in many other parables as well. The good shepherd, the entire heavenly host rejoicing at the return of the one. So this coming back into the family then is it's laid out in the Gospels. You get maybe some pieces of that. You might see a little bit of that in Mark and Matthew and Luke, but you get this full story in the Gospel of John, and you get the story in the Gospel of Thomas and some of the other non-canonical Gospels as well. They back them up. John doesn't just stand alone. It looks like in the Bible sometimes when you're reading the Gospels, it's like, wow, John is way out there. John's got a whole lot that he's saying, and you don't find that in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's only there, but you can see a lot of John's supporting material in the non-canonical Gospels as well. But Jesus makes it clear just how little he cares about sin in the whole story. So sorry, there's going to be an edit there. I actually turned on another speaker in my pocket and started getting some great lyrics from Brother Naco Bear. Jumping in the middle of my John chapter 8 introduction. So anyway, back to what I was saying about this teaching from Jesus about sin, and just where he puts sin in the list of his priorities. So John chapter 8, this beautiful chapter in the Bible that is definitely in my top 5. Depending on the Bible that you read, you may see a heading at a bold heading at the introduction of chapter 8, and it's you might see the adulterous woman, as if this chapter is about adultery and the lessons around sin. But just read the story of the adulterous woman. He's fair. Jesus is literally in the temple. He's not preaching up in Capernaum on a hillside somewhere. He's in the temple. These Pharisees come to see what he has to say and to test him, and so they bring the adulterous woman who was caught in the very act of adultery. Seems kind of odd. These priests are claiming they caught her having sex outside of wedlock. It's not a rumor. They caught her doing it. There's no man with her who was also committing this sin of adultery, so I guess they just let the guy go. Or it was one of the priests who were committing adultery with the woman. There's some holes in the case here for the Pharisees that they're trying to bring. The prosecution's story has some holes. Jesus is barely willing to look up and even entertain this trial that they're trying to put on for this woman. But they say, clearly in Moses' law, adultery is wrong and we should stone this woman. So what do you think? And Jesus is writing in the dirt with his finger. He just looks at him and is like, yeah, he is without sin. Yeah, you should get this thing going. Pick up a stone and stone her. If you're not sinful and you want to punish sin, go right ahead. And he goes back down and keeps fiddling in the dirt and looks back up, and all the Pharisees are gone, and this woman who was standing there, literally fearing for her life, hoping that this rabbi who was teaching in the temple would maybe make an argument on her behalf and save her life. And it's a pretty clear argument Jesus makes. Yeah, like, anybody out there who's not sinful, you should judge. Yeah, go ahead and judge and punish other people for committing sin. But there's nobody present. None of those Pharisees were willing to say, "Well, I'm sin-free. I'm not a sinful person." The Pharisees had only been around for about 200 years at the time. They started as this ultra-conservative group of Torah believers who were not, from the priesthood or the right lineage of Levi to be, a temple priest. They were these ultra-conservative, ultra-orthodox believers who went around enforcing the laws in the local areas. They ran the local churches. They had developed into this network of strict enforcers of the law. The similar thing that you would see in today's world that many Christians are afraid of is this idea within Islam, the idea of the enforcement of Sharia law. That is effectively what the Pharisees were for the Jews. Not everybody felt like that. Not just like today. Not every Muslim believes we should have Sharia law courts popping up in local churches, and you're bringing adulterous women forward to be stoned publicly. This is not what you would want to see in your neighborhood today from a Muslim who believed in Sharia law and the punishments associated with sin. That is what Jesus is doing with the Pharisees. Like, your whole idea of punishing sin is ridiculous because you all sin too. What are we doing here? So this first part of chapter 8 makes it pretty clear what Jesus thinks about sin. Everybody does it. His direction to the adulterous woman is, there's nobody here to judge you. You should just go and don't do that anymore. Like, I'm sure at that point she had learned her lesson. Just the fear of being killed for this act. I'm sure she's not going to want to just run around and be an adulterous woman anymore. She probably knows right from wrong. The only thing that was missing in this first part of John chapter 8 is this mortal punishment, this capital punishment for committing this sin. Jesus has zero interest in that. His direction is just don't do that anymore. So yeah, when that part of chapter 8 concludes, we don't go to a new chapter. The chapter continues, and Jesus has this full interaction with the Pharisees after that, and it is clear in that chapter. If you'd read Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and the early parts of John, you kind of see this evolution of understanding with what we're talking about here. When we're talking about Jesus, this person in this story, this is not just a son of man. This isn't just a rabbi. This isn't just a teacher. This is a miracle worker and this voice of God, that he carries the power to speak on God's behalf. And because of this power that he has been given from God to speak on God's behalf, he is the light of the world. He is the beacon. He is the one that the world is meant to follow in order to have this return to the Father, to be invited back into the Holy Family. And join Jesus and become like Jesus, where you live in the Father and the Father lives in you. This is the rest of the story of the Gospel of John. But before we leave chapter 8, Jesus makes it clear just who he is and who he thinks these Pharisees serve. These Pharisees that are starting the chapter with a sense of sin should be punished by death. These Pharisees are told by Jesus that they do not even know who Jesus is, and because they don't know who Jesus is and that Jesus comes from the Father and the Father is in him and he is the light of the world, the very fact that they don't recognize who he is means they don't know him and they don't know his Father. They are pretty upset about this because they can see that Jesus is saying he is from Abraham and he is from the God of Abraham. And they are saying they're from the God of Abraham and serve the God of Abraham. So they take this very personally, that Jesus is trying to tell them they don't even know who God is. But Jesus doubles down and explains that the reason you don't know is because you have fallen for the oldest trick in the book. You have listened to the father of lies. This father of lies concept goes all the way back to the garden, and this accuser, this deceiver, this deceptive serpent that initiates sin, that brings sin into the world, that separates humankind from the Creator. Jesus says, the reason you don't know me is because you have been tricked by this father of lies, and that's who you serve. And that's why you're so concerned about this sin thing, this punishment of sin. This whole way of thinking is what the father of lies has told our leaders is important. And Jesus is there to say, sorry, that's just not that important anymore. So yeah, he calls the Pharisees devil worshippers, and explains to them that's why they're so fixated on this sin, punishment, judgment side of things, and that's not what he is here to do, even though he could be. He could deliver judgment all day long if he wanted to, but he chooses to instead just look at the adulterous woman, give her some good advice, don't sin anymore. The real scolding, the real talking to that happens here is not to the adulterous woman, it is to the Pharisees who started this whole charade and tried to bring these accusations and looking for this punishment. Jesus just doesn't have time for it. So yeah, the rest of the Gospel of John's pretty good book. There's a lot more teaching there, and Jesus elaborates more and more about what this means, and gives many parables and many teachings to his disciples, and this very long extended teaching that he gives during the Last Supper toward the end of John really clarifies what his ministry meant to them in this final capstone teaching that he gives as his final teaching inside of John. And within there he expands all of this further and deeper and makes it clear this way to make my Father happy is to follow my teachings, my story, the way I have done things, what I've told you is important. That is from God. I didn't make that stuff up. God is in me. I am the Word of God. This is the new covenant. This is what God really worries about from this point forward. So follow me, and you will become like me. You and I will become one. You will become a part of my family. You will be welcome in my Father's house. As long as you follow these commandments that I've given you from my Father, you are now welcome in my Father's house. This is how you return. It is not through some declaration of faith. It is through following his instruction. And he also says in John, this salvation through a declaration of faith is not true. He makes it clear that many people will think they're going to they're going to get into my Father's house because they've called me Lord and they've prophesied in my name. Many people will be disappointed because they will find that just declaring Jesus as Lord is not how you get into his Father's house. It's not how you become a part of his Father's family. You become a part of his Father's family, and you become like him by following his teachings. So yeah, his teachings didn't focus a lot on punishment for sin. His teachings focused a lot on loving God and receiving God's love, loving each other, forgiving each other, and through this forgiveness of everyone else, you will earn forgiveness from God and be welcomed into his family. This is not the teaching of the Christian church today. It's really, really hard for me to accept. That's why we need to talk about it. That's why we need to speak up on behalf of the teaching. Jesus makes it clear that his teachings will divide people, just like it did in his time. His teachings were shocking to the religious leaders at the time. They were so different. This new covenant, this new agreement, this new way of getting back into the Father's house and following the Father's rules, these were completely different rules. And it was no longer about sin. So if you read the ends of all the Gospels and you read much of the rest of the New Testament, there's a great focus on this final act of atonement that Jesus performs on behalf of mankind. But this final act of atonement, this sacrifice that he makes to defeat sin and to finally eliminate this part of the making things right with God, this sacrifice for the people that is discussed in great detail in Christian churches. It's important for the people to transition from this old covenant to this new covenant. That was an important understanding of how things were and why things are different now. But now that that's complete, it creates the room in the story for the teachings of Jesus to reign supreme. It gives those teachings substance, and it gives them completeness in this return journey to God. That it's not about sin anymore. All will sin, all have sinned. The death of Jesus was not about sin disappearing from the world. It was about the judgment of your sins no longer applying. So the freedom from sin that comes from the ends of all the Gospels and the story of the death of Jesus, the freedom, the release from the chains of these sins seems to be very well documented and discussed in the Christian church today. But that's not where the story ends. Then you have this freedom from sin. You now have the freedom to actually follow the teachings of Jesus and be right with God. So that teaching is all about loving your neighbor, doing your best, failing, asking for forgiveness, trying to do better. But the more that these teachings sink in and change your heart, the more these fundamental reasons for sin will leave you. That's why Matthew chapter 5 is also one of my favorite chapters. He explains that the problem isn't the actions. The problem is this underlying human nature, and the teachings of Jesus are all about how we can overcome that fundamental nature and sin less. But his death and sacrifice didn't eliminate our human nature. It gives us a new lease on life and a new agreement with God, to where we don't have to spend all of our time worrying about these mistakes that we made. Just ask forgiveness, and it's okay. Focus on changing your heart and becoming a different type of person, and a follower of the light, of the way, and just interacting with the world in a completely different way than you did before. So I think it's a pretty good message that we could just change emphasis a little bit here and there. We can redirect even within the Scripture. You don't have to add all these other books that I read and find great comfort and wisdom from these other branches of Christianity in the early days. You can just stick with the approved books, the one mission of Paul and his explanation, and the Gospels that don't contradict that completely. You can just stick with that part and just change your focus, and there's plenty there that can lead you back. But it may be confusing at times. Like, there are things missing there. That's not the full story. There's not enough teaching in these teachings of Jesus there to fully understand, well, why does this not apply anymore? And why does that not apply anymore? And so does this mean that this love extends to these people and those people? And does it mean that this freedom from sin is actually freedom from sin? Like, there is no punishment of that? How does that work? You really do need to bring in the rest of the story from Jesus to fill in those gaps. But if you're not ready to bring in those other stories to fill in, there's still enough there to change your heart and be reborn, which I can tell you is a lot of fun. It's a great relief when you find that freedom from sin and the old covenant. So yeah, we'll leave it there. Hopefully I can figure out how to splice these two videos together. Shout out to Nako Bear. Maybe I'll put a link to the description of that song that just popped up and interrupted the video. I'm sure that's there for a reason. So, have a good day.